This gathering unearthed a secret that tore a family apart. The husband stumbled upon footage of his wife's betrayal and did the only thing he thought was right. My dear listener, get comfortable. I'm about to tell you how it all unfolded. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Alright, let's dive in. Hey, are you okay? Melissa's gentle voice cut through the background noise of the TV as she softly placed her hand on my shoulder. I was sinking deeper into the cushions, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me. The evening had barely started, and the faint sounds from the television filled the room. I had barely managed to drag myself through the door after a hellish day at work. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch. Yeah, I muttered, my voice flat and distant. Just worn out. That meeting was a nightmare. I rubbed my temples, trying to ease the dull headache that had been throbbing all day thanks to endless spreadsheets and a flood of questions from my team. Melissa knew the signs. She had seen me like this before, many times. Sitting down next to me, she started to absent-mindedly fiddle with the hem of her dress. You should get out tonight, she suggested, her tone casual but with a hint of concern. There's a party at the club. It might do you some good. She smiled, her voice light and teasing. Megan and I are going. It's been a while since we had a good time together. I glanced her way, noticing the sparkle in her eyes. Socializing came so easily to Melissa. She thrived on good conversations, dancing, and the occasional fancy cocktail. But for me, events like that always seemed to drain the life out of me rather than give me a boost. I'm not so sure, I mumbled, leaning my head back and closing my eyes. Just the thought of blaring music and shallow small talk made my headache worse. I'm too tired. You and Megan go without me. As if on cue, Megan entered the room, adjusting her dress with a bright, infectious smile. At 30, she still had that youthful energy, always ready to dive into the next adventure. Come on, Dad, she teased, the sound of her heels tapping lightly as she came closer. You can't leave us to fend for ourselves tonight. She planted a quick kiss on my cheek before glancing at herself in the mirror by the door. The club's going to be packed. You don't want to miss it. I couldn't help but grin at her enthusiasm. Megan had a way of lighting up any space she entered, but tonight I just didn't have the energy to keep up. I think I'll pass, I chuckled softly. You and your mom can party enough for all of us. Megan laughed as she grabbed her purse from the dresser. Alright, but if you change your mind, you know where we'll be. Melissa stood up, smoothing her dress before leaning down to kiss me quickly. Are you sure you don't want to come along? She asked one more time, her voice gentle, though I could sense a slight hint of disappointment in her tone. Yeah, I'm sure, I said, trying to reassure her. I just need some peace and quiet tonight. She smiled playfully, a twinkle in her eye. Alright, she said with a quiet laugh, but don't be mad if you miss out on the best party of the year. With that, they headed out, their laughter echoing briefly in the hallway before the door clicked shut. Suddenly, the house felt too quiet. I glanced at the clock, it wasn't even 7 yet, but the silence already felt heavy, pressing in on me. For a while, I just sat there, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. Normally, I relished the stillness after a long day, but tonight something was off. There was a nagging feeling, an unease I couldn't quite place. Maybe it's just the headache, I muttered to myself as I stood up and made my way to the kitchen for a glass of water. I tried to shake the strange feeling, reminding myself that everything was fine. Melissa and Megan had always loved going to these club events, and they'd been doing it for years, ever since Megan moved back in after college. The club was a staple in our lives, barbecues, holiday gatherings, summer picnics. I had never had a reason to worry. They were always surrounded by friends. I'd never had any reason to worry. They were always surrounded by good people. But tonight, something felt off. I sat back down on the couch, my eyes drifting toward the empty space where Melissa had been just moments ago. She looked beautiful, as always, full of that same vibrant energy, even after all these years. And Megan, my little girl, now a grown woman, still had that playful sparkle in her eyes. They both mean the world to me, and I trust them completely. So why can't I shake this uneasy feeling? The thought kept spinning around in my head while I aimlessly flipped through TV channels, not paying attention to anything in particular. Maybe it was just the exhaustion catching up with me, or maybe it was the way Melissa had insisted I join them tonight. Wasn't there something strange about the way she asked me? I shook my head, trying to shake off the creeping doubts. You're overthinking things, I told myself. There was no real reason to worry. Melissa had always been dependable, especially when it came to Megan. Sure, she had her unpredictable moments, but at her core, she was a good person. Still, as the house grew quieter and time seemed to crawl, that nagging feeling refused to leave me. I glanced at the clock again. It was only 8 p.m. They were probably just arriving at the club, settling in with drinks, and catching up with their friends. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine it, Melissa laughing with the group while Megan, as usual, was surrounded by a bunch of young guys, her bright energy lighting up the room. They're just having fun, I kept telling myself. That's all it is. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, the discomfort stayed with me. I stared up at the ceiling, watching the slow rotations of the fan. I should have gone with them. I should have pushed through the tiredness and just gone. What's wrong with me tonight? I muttered under my breath, running a hand through my hair. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just feeling off because of the long day. As the hours dragged on, I tried distracting myself with a movie, but every quiet moment between scenes only brought back that anxious feeling. The knot in my stomach just wouldn't go away. By 9 o'clock, I gave up, turned off the TV, and decided to head to bed. The anxiety still hovered over me, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Melissa and Megan would be back soon, and everything would go back to normal, just like always. Yet deep down, a small voice kept whispering, something wasn't right. I just hadn't figured it out yet. The next morning started like any other. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping a hot cup of coffee while casually scrolling through work emails. Sunlight streamed into the room, warming everything up as I lazily scanned through reports. The rich aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, and for a moment, the calm of the morning helped ease the leftover tension from the night before. Then the doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the clock, just after 7 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone this early. Setting my coffee down, I stood up and walked to the front door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw Alex, our new neighbor. He'd moved in recently, a big guy with a friendly smile. But today, something was off. His posture was stiff, and his expression was far more serious than usual. I opened the door. "Hey, Alex, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, though I couldn't shake the odd vibe he was giving off. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tight, lacking the usual warmth. The smile he always wore was nowhere to be found. "Sure, come on in," I said, stepping aside to let him in. It felt like he was carrying the weight of something heavy, like a storm brewing just over the horizon. Alex stepped into the kitchen, his eyes darting around the room, as if he was making sure we were alone. "Is everything all right?" I asked, frowning at his unusual behavior. Normally, Alex was laid back, always cracking jokes or sharing something light-hearted. But today, he looked on edge. He glanced at me, nervously fiddling with his phone. "Listen, man," he began, his voice hesitant, "I hate to be the one to tell you this, but you need to hear it." A sinking feeling started to grow in my stomach. I leaned against the kitchen counter, folding my arms across my chest. "What are you talking about?" I asked, feeling a hint of dread creeping in. You didn't go to the party, did you? Alex's voice was low, and he avoided making eye contact. I shook my head slightly. No, I wasn't feeling great, so I stayed in and went to bed. Why? What's going on? Alex let out a low whistle, shaking his head as if he was struggling to find the right words. Dude, you missed one hell of a night. Things got out of hand. The club manager. He was in the jacuzzi with two girls, and let's just say, it wasn't exactly innocent. It was crazy. Here, take a look. A wave of unease washed over me. Alex wasn't the type to blow things out of proportion, and the tension in his voice made my chest tighten. What are you talking about? What happened? My voice rose slightly, reflecting the anxiety that was building in the room. He paused for a moment before pulling out his phone. I didn't want to show you this, but you've got to see it. I felt a knot forming in my gut as I watched him unlock his phone, his movements slow, like he was dreading what he was about to reveal. My mind raced, trying to prepare for whatever was coming. When he finally turned the screen toward me, it felt like a punch straight to the chest. The video started off blurry, but soon enough, the image cleared. It was the club's jacuzzi, but it felt like I was looking at something I didn't recognize. There was laughter, splashing. At first, the faces were hard to make out through the steam, but as soon as it clicked who they were, my breath caught in my throat. Melissa and Megan. My wife and my daughter. They were both there, laughing and flirting with the club manager. My vision blurred, and everything around me started to spin. The club manager casually draped his arm over Melissa's shoulder, leaning in far too close. My heart pounded painfully in my chest, each beat like a hammer blow. They were laughing, touching, and then it escalated into something far worse. They crossed a line. No, this can't be real, I whispered, barely able to force the words through the dryness in my throat. I could hardly breathe. Alex stayed silent, watching me with pity in his eyes. I didn't want to show you, but you needed to know, he said softly. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. I stood there, frozen, as the horrifying scene unfolded in front of me. Melissa's laughter echoed in my head, but it sounded different now, twisted by betrayal. Megan was right beside her, both of them acting like I didn't exist, like they didn't care at all. A wave of disgust roiled inside me, and I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. My wife, my daughter, with him. How? How is this even happening? I muttered under my breath, barely able to comprehend the words. My thoughts were a mess, grasping for some kind of explanation, but there wasn't one. Nothing about this made sense. Alex shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. I'm really sorry, man. I thought you should know. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to break something, anything to release the rage boiling inside me. But I just stood there, frozen in disbelief, watching as the people I loved the most betrayed me in a way I could never have imagined. Thanks, Alex, I muttered, though the words felt empty. I couldn't even look at him. I just need some time. He nodded, sympathy all over his face. Take all the time you need. I'm really sorry, brother. If you need anything, you know I'm just next door. I couldn't respond. My throat tightened, and I stayed silent as the door softly clicked shut behind him. The moment he left, my legs gave out, and I collapsed into the nearest chair, clutching the phone like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The screen still showed that cursed image of Melissa and Megan, both smiling, as if they hadn't just ripped my world apart. I stared at their faces, but my vision soon blurred, and a wave of rage began to build deep inside me. How could they? How could they do this to me? Melissa, the woman I'd loved and trusted for over 30 years, and Megan, my daughter, my own flesh and blood. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, threatening to spill over, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I tightened my grip on the phone, my whole body trembling from the sheer weight of the shock, anger, and disbelief coursing through me. It felt like a nightmare, but the video made it all too real. I sat there, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. My family, my entire life, it was all gone. Everything I thought I knew was destroyed in an instant. All that remained was the crushing truth: the people I loved most had betrayed me in a way I could never forgive. The numbness that had consumed me started to fade, replaced by something far more powerful. Anger. Pure, seething anger. The hours after Alex's visit blurred together in a haze. The video kept playing on a loop in my mind, their laughter ringing out like a cruel taunt. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. All I felt was rage, burning hotter by the minute, but I wasn't about to let it spiral out of control. No, if they could hurt me like this, I'd make sure they felt every bit of that pain right back. They didn't know I was aware of what they'd done, and that was my greatest advantage. I had to keep my emotions in check, hide the storm brewing inside me. I needed time to plan, to come up with the perfect way to get back at them. They would feel the betrayal I was enduring, and they wouldn't see it coming. I locked myself in my office, pacing back and forth as thoughts raced through my head. 1,000 ideas flashed by. How could I expose them? How could I humiliate them? How could I strip them of everything, just like they had stripped me of my dignity? But nothing felt like enough. It had to be flawless, no shouting, no dramatic confrontations. I wouldn't let them see how shattered I was inside. I needed control. I wanted to hit them so hard that they'd never recover. Sitting down at my desk, I turned on my computer and started searching for anything I could use against them. My thoughts sharpened, growing colder and more calculated with each passing minute. The pain was still fresh, but it was slowly being drowned out by a thirst for revenge. Quietly, I made calls, reached out to old contacts who owed me favors. I took notes, combed through financial records, shared assets, and legal loopholes. This wasn't just about emotional revenge. I was going to dismantle their lives, piece by piece. As I dug deeper into the documents, it hit me just how entwined our lives had become. Melissa and I had built everything together: our finances, our home, our investments. Everything was connected, woven into a web that I now saw as a battlefield. Every tie between us was a potential weapon, and I knew exactly where to strike. Slowly, a plan began to form, cold and unforgiving. I combed through every detail: joint bank accounts, properties in her name. I found ways to drain her, to leave her with nothing. I started looking for divorce lawyers, the kind who didn't care about fairness but were known for their ruthless tactics. I made calls, set up meetings. I didn't want an equal split. I wanted to leave her utterly ruined. And then there was Megan. This part of the situation was far more delicate. Megan was our daughter, and despite everything that had unfolded, the thought of hurting her tore at me. But her betrayal had cut too deep to simply brush aside. She needed to learn a lesson, one that would leave a lasting impression. Megan was still young, just starting to carve out her place in the adult world. For her, it wasn't financial stability at risk, but her social standing. She thrived in the spotlight, basking in the approval of those around her, always at the center of attention. But what would happen if that world came crashing down? If the very people she relied on began to turn away? I began reaching out carefully to a few of her close friends, dropping subtle hints. Little remarks slipped into casual conversation, suggestions about how she'd acted at a party, or how she might have gotten too close to certain people. These whispers would make their rounds, and I knew it wouldn't be long before they reached the right ears. Her carefully crafted image would start to unravel, and the collapse would be inevitable. That evening, when Melissa and Megan came home, I was ready. They walked in together, laughing as though nothing had changed. Melissa set her purse down on the table and smiled at me the same way she always did, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. Her affection repulsed me, but I forced myself to return the smile. "How was your day?" she asked, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Busy, but fine, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Megan was just as carefree as ever, practically dancing into the room with that contagious energy of hers. "Dad, you should have come. The party was incredible," she exclaimed, her face lighting up with excitement. "You would have loved it." Suppressing the wave of disgust that threatened to rise, I managed a faint smile. "Maybe next time," I said, knowing full well there wouldn't be a next time. I listened as they went on talking, completely unaware of what was coming. Melissa chatted about a conversation she had with a neighbor, while Megan gushed about the party, the drinks, the music, every detail of the night. My hand tightened into a fist under the table, but I remained composed. I couldn't let them see the truth. They needed to believe they were still living their normal lives, with me playing the role of the devoted husband and father, the man they thought was blissfully unaware of the truth. Melissa headed to the kitchen to start dinner while Megan continued sharing stories. "And the club manager? Oh, he was hilarious," she laughed, as if that place hadn't become a dagger twisting in my heart. "We were all laughing so hard, we cried." I forced out a laugh, nodding along as if I cared, all while mentally cataloging every word, every lie, every time they pretended everything was fine. Their laughter, their casual conversation, it only stoked the fire inside me, fueling my resolve. During dinner, I kept up the charade, asking about their future plans, listening intently to their day-to-day chatter as if I was the caring, engaged father I had always been. But my thoughts were miles away, already planning my next move. The financial pieces were in place. Soon enough, Melissa would wake up to find her accounts drained, her security destroyed. And Megan? Her carefully curated social life would begin to crumble as the rumors took hold. At first, they'd chalk it up to bad luck, maybe a misunderstanding. But eventually, they'd see the truth. They'd know it was all me, that I was behind every downfall. And by then, it would be too late. As the night wore on, the anger inside me simmered, barely held in check, but I kept it hidden beneath the surface. I smiled, laughed at their jokes, and played the role they expected me to play, but I wasn't the man they thought I was anymore. As I sat there, listening to their laughter echo through the house, I made a silent vow. They wouldn't see it coming. By the time they realized what was happening, it would already be too late. They had destroyed my world, and now it was my turn to return the favor. The next day, everything would change. What followed was a series of meticulously planned actions, each one carefully thought out down to the smallest detail. My objective was clear, to make them pay for what they had done. Every decision was intentional, every move precise. I spent hours in my office, poring over documents, setting the pieces of my plan into motion. Everything had to go off without a hitch. It wasn't just about the club manager's time with my wife and daughter. I wanted the courts, lawyers, and anyone who cared to watch, to witness the entire spectacle unfold. One morning, while Melissa went about her usual routine, I quietly reached out to a lawyer who specialized in high-stakes divorces. My instructions were simple: leave no stone unturned. No mercy. No compromises. We spoke for about an hour, and by the end of the conversation, the path forward was crystal clear. The lawyer would prepare the divorce papers, ensuring that every clause and condition worked in my favor. Our assets, the house, the savings, the investments, they would be split in such a way that Melissa would be left with nothing but scraps. That evening, after finalizing things with the lawyer, I sat down with Melissa at the kitchen table. She was sipping a glass of wine, flipping through a magazine, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. I kept things light, casual. When the moment felt right, I leaned in and, with a calm but firm voice, said, "Melissa, I've been thinking. Maybe we should consider family therapy." She looked at me, a bit surprised but not alarmed. "Therapy?" she asked, her tone casual. "Is something wrong?" I shrugged, keeping my cool. I just think it might be good for us, you know. To keep the marriage strong. We've been through a lot, and I want to make sure we stay in a good place. Melissa smiled, nodding as if she were actually considering it. You're probably right, she said. Everything's fine, but it couldn't hurt, right? I smiled back, hiding the bitter truth that our marriage had already crumbled. She sat there, sipping her wine, agreeing to therapy, completely clueless that the divorce was already in motion. The irony of her innocence was almost laughable. I'll find someone, I suggested. Maybe we can start next week, knowing full well that by then, the divorce papers would have already been filed and therapy would be the least of her worries. She leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, still blissfully unaware of the catastrophe looming over her. That sounds great, she replied, turning her attention back to the magazine, oblivious to the chaos that was about to unfold. I excused myself and headed back to my office, where I continued making preparations for the storm that was coming. With Megan, I had to take a different approach. Her social standing was her weak point, and I knew that chipping away at it would deal the most devastating blow. She thrived on admiration, on being the center of attention. So I started by planting small seeds of doubt, making offhand remarks that would gnaw at her confidence. When she talked about her plans or career, I'd casually ask, "Are you sure that's the best choice?" At first, she shrugged off my comments, too wrapped up in her own self-assurance to notice the subtle shift. She'd laugh, roll her eyes, and brush off what I said. But I could tell those seeds had been planted. Slowly, those doubts began to take root. Over time, I noticed the cracks in her confidence starting to show. She began second-guessing herself, questioning her decisions more and more. It was a gradual process, but those tiny cracks were becoming more and more visible. She grew defensive, always trying to justify herself, but I could see it, the walls she had built around her self-image were starting to crumble. She became defensive, always trying to justify herself. But the more she pushed back, the less I bothered to listen. "Dad, it's my life. You don't understand how things work anymore," she snapped one evening after I questioned her decisions again. Her frustration was unmistakable. I leaned back, keeping my voice calm. "I'm just saying, Megan, maybe you should rethink things. Charm only takes you so far." She shot me an angry look, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. Not long after that, she started to pull away, spending more time with her friends and avoiding any serious conversations with me. It was all going exactly according to plan. I needed her to feel uncertain, to lose that sense of confidence she clung to so tightly. The seeds of doubt I planted would, over time, unravel the life she had so carefully crafted. Behind the scenes, I quietly set the stage for the downfall of both Melissa and Megan's financial security. Without drawing any attention, I began tightening my control over our joint assets, slowly moving accounts and shifting funds to keep everything just out of Melissa's reach. She had no idea that her financial foundation was already slipping through her fingers. By the time she realized it, it would be far too late. One evening, as she sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her, mindlessly scrolling through her phone, Melissa glanced up at me with mild curiosity. "You've been spending a lot of time in the office lately. Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded, keeping my tone casual. "Just a lot of work. There's a lot going on." She didn't press further, and her attention drifted back to whatever was on her screen. She had no clue that while she felt safe and secure, her entire world was teetering on the edge of collapse. In the days that followed, I proceeded with extreme caution, advancing my plan one careful step at a time. Every move was calculated, every detail part of the bigger picture. I wasn't in a rush. I understood that revenge is best served slowly and with precision. Each piece had to fall perfectly into place. Even the suggestion to see a therapist was part of the plan. I made sure to sign us up for sessions, playing the part of the concerned husband who genuinely wanted to work on our marriage. Melissa, ever the optimist, agreed wholeheartedly, thinking this was just another hurdle we'd overcome together, like we always had. But I knew better. I had no intention of fixing anything. Meanwhile, Megan, always so confident, began to drift further from me. The tension between us grew, and I made sure she felt it. Unbeknownst to her, the rumors I had been quietly spreading within her social circle were starting to take effect. People began to question her choices, her character. Her friendship started to crumble, and the flawless image she had crafted for herself started to crack. I watched her unravel with quiet satisfaction. Neither she nor Melissa suspected a thing. They had no idea that the ground beneath them was slowly giving way. The stage was set. All that was left was to wait for the perfect moment to deliver the final blow. And that moment finally came. My heart raced as I called Melissa and Megan into the living room. The house felt eerily silent, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I had imagined this scene so many times, but now that it was here, the tension was almost unbearable. Melissa arrived first, her expression soft, completely unaware that anything was amiss. Megan followed soon after, absorbed in her phone, oblivious to the devastation about to hit. They sat on the couch, sensing the seriousness of the moment but still completely in the dark. "What's going on, honey?" Melissa asked, her voice casual as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Megan barely glanced up from her phone, still distracted. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked over to the table, picked up the folder I had meticulously prepared, and placed it on the coffee table in front of them. I opened it, revealing the photos, and then hit play on the video. Melissa's laughter, Megan's hand resting on the club manager's shoulder, the scene in the jacuzzi that had torn my world apart. Melissa's eyes darted between the images, confusion quickly morphing into panic. Her hand flew to her mouth as if trying to stifle the flood of reality crashing down on her. Megan, usually so composed and confident, turned pale as the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her. The room was thick with the stench of their guilt. "I know about the club," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. It felt as though I was outside of myself, watching the chaos unfold as a mere observer, detached from the storm of emotions that swirled around me. Melissa's sharp gasp broke the silence, and Megan froze completely, her eyes wide with shock. Their reaction was exactly what I had expected, and it only fanned the flames of my simmering anger. "What is this?" Melissa's voice trembled, her words stumbling as if her mind couldn't grasp the reality of what was happening. I leaned in closer, my gaze hard and unrelenting. "You tell me," I said in a low, menacing tone, pointing at the damning photos. "That's you, Melissa." "And you, Megan," I continued, shifting my glare toward her. The evidence was laid out before them, both of them, side by side with that sleazy club manager in the hot tub. The disbelief on their faces was unmistakable. Melissa instinctively shook her head, denial setting in before she could even form a coherent sentence. Megan's phone slipped from her trembling hands and fell onto the couch, her eyes welling with tears. "It's not what you think," Melissa stammered, her voice desperate. "We were drunk. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake." A bitter laugh escaped me, sharp and cold as it echoed in the room like a blade cutting through the tension. "A mistake," I repeated, mocking her pathetic excuse. "You shattered our family for what? A fleeting moment of stupidity?" I turned to Megan, fury now pouring out of me. "And you? How could you? I raised you, gave you everything. And this? This is how you repay me? By betraying me with him and your mother?" Tears streamed down Megan's face, her sobs growing louder. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't think," she whimpered, her voice trembling with guilt. "Didn't think?" I snapped, cutting her off. "That's your excuse. You didn't think when you climbed into that hot tub. Didn't think when you flirted and laughed with him like I didn't exist. Like none of this mattered." Melissa reached toward me, her hand shaking. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. We can fix this. It doesn't have to end like this. It was just a stupid mistake. I recoiled from her touch, disgust rising in my throat like bile. A mistake? I growled. Is that all this is to you? What about the years we spent together, Melissa? The sacrifices, the trust, the love. Was it all so meaningless that you threw it away for one night with some lowlife? Her eyes glistened with guilt, but she remained speechless, searching for words she couldn't seem to find. Her lips quivered, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with the weight of what she had done. I could feel the power shifting, their control slipping away. They had destroyed everything, our family, our home, our life. Now they stood helpless, unable to justify the devastation they'd caused. I thought we'd spend our lives together, I said softly, my voice cracking as I looked at Melissa. You were my partner, my best friend. And now? Now you're just a stranger, someone I don't even recognize anymore. Melissa collapsed onto the couch, her sobs uncontrollable. And you, I added, turning toward Megan, my tone hardening. You were my daughter, my little girl. How could you do this? Not just to me, but to yourself. You've shamed yourself and destroyed everything. How could you let this happen? Megan's sobs grew louder, but I stood firm. They needed to fully grasp the weight of their actions. Do you think I'm just going to let you both walk away after everything? I asked, my voice growing more certain as I regained control. No. There are always consequences for your actions. You've torn this family apart, and now you'll have to face the aftermath. Please, Melissa whispered, her voice barely audible as she buried her face in her hands. We can try therapy. We can fix this. We'll do whatever it takes. Just don't let it end like this, she begged. I slowly shook my head, unshaken in my decision. It's already over, Melissa. You just haven't accepted it yet. My words hung in the air, heavy and final, as I stood up and walked toward the door. They were paralyzed, unable to move or follow me, frozen by the wreckage they had caused. I paused briefly, casting one last glance at them. By the end of the week, you'll have the divorce papers. Don't bother trying to fight it. You've already lost. The soft click of the door closing behind me felt like the final nail in the coffin. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of peace. The next day, I filed for divorce, marking the official end of my marriage to Melissa. I made sure every detail was handled swiftly and without hesitation. No second thoughts, no room for reconciliation. That morning, I packed my belongings and neatly placed Melissa and Megan's things into bags, setting them by the front door. They tried to speak, cried, and pleaded, but their voices faded into the background. To me, they were nothing but meaningless noise. Melissa sat on the couch, her face pale and swollen from the endless tears. She had spent the entire night searching for the words to salvage whatever was left, but there was nothing left to save. Megan stood beside her, silent, finally understanding the weight of what had happened. Please just talk to us, Melissa begged, her voice hoarse and trembling. We made a horrible mistake, but we don't deserve to lose everything. I didn't flinch. You lost everything the moment you stepped into that jacuzzi with him, I replied, my voice cold and unwavering. This isn't something you can apologize for. You both made your choices. Now you'll have to live with them. Megan finally spoke, her voice shaking, filled with regret. Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't even know why I did it. Please don't do this. Don't throw us out. I'll do anything to fix this. I looked at her, my daughter, the one I had cared for and loved for 30 years. What should have been hard to say came easily. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, I said, meeting her eyes. You were supposed to be my daughter, Megan. My family. But you chose her. I gestured toward Melissa, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. You both destroyed everything. Now you have to face the consequences. I hope you didn't bring back something contagious from that party. My words were harsh, but I wasn't finished. I want both of you out of my house. You have a week to find somewhere else to stay, but you're not living here anymore. Melissa's sobs grew louder, and Megan hugged herself, trembling as she tried to find some kind of comfort. But I felt no sympathy for them. They had turned me into a fool, wrecked everything I had built with them. Now it was their turn to feel the loss. Please don't do this. We have nowhere to go, Melissa cried, her voice breaking as she stepped toward me, as if she could somehow repair the damage her betrayal had caused. I shook my head. That's not my problem anymore. You should have thought about that before you decided to disgrace me. With those words, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back, not when Melissa's sobs echoed down the hallway, and not when Megan called out to me one last time. I walked out, and as the door closed behind me, an unexpected sense of freedom washed over me, as though the heavy burden I'd carried for so long had finally been lifted. The consequences of their actions began to unravel slowly after I left, as I set out to untangle the intricate web of lies spun by Melissa, Megan, and the club manager. Their deceit was deep, but I was determined to bring the truth to light. The first step was to discreetly deliver the compromising video and photographs to the right people in the community. Michael, the club manager, had long been seen as a well-respected figure in town, known for his charm and easygoing nature. But with just one letter, his flawless reputation began to crumble. Within days, the town was abuzz with whispers and rumors. The club acted quickly, cutting all ties with Michael in an attempt to salvage its own reputation. His once unshakable image was shattered beyond repair. The invitations stopped. Friends who once stood by him suddenly disappeared, wanting nothing to do with a man caught up in such a scandal. The respect he had commanded evaporated like mist, leaving behind nothing but awkward silences and sideways glances wherever he went. No one wanted to be associated with someone who had betrayed a family by being involved with both a married woman and her daughter. Michael's attempts to salvage his reputation were futile, he was ruined. Melissa and Megan didn't fare much better. Forced to leave the house, they found temporary refuge with friends, but the shame followed them everywhere. The news of their actions spread like wildfire, and before long, they were pariahs in the community. Melissa reached out to family and friends for support, but most had already taken my side, unable to forgive such a betrayal. The magnitude of their actions was too great to overlook. Rumors swirled that they struggled to find permanent housing. Melissa lost her part-time job at the boutique when her boss learned of her involvement in the scandal. Megan couldn't show her face around town. She became the subject of endless gossip, with people whispering about her betrayal of her mother, her affair with Michael, and the shame it brought. Everywhere they went, people talked about how Michael had contracted syphilis, and many blamed Melissa and Megan for it, though the truth of that rumor didn't really matter to me. Megan, once the center of attention, now became the target of ridicule and quiet scorn. The town, small as it was, never stopped talking. As for me, I began to move forward, slowly but with new determination. I refused to let their betrayal define me or control my future. I surrounded myself with loyal friends, people who genuinely cared about me. I hired a lawyer who made sure the divorce left Melissa with almost nothing. I kept the house, the savings, everything. Melissa was left with just the bare necessities, barely enough to get by. At times, I wondered if I had been too harsh. But then I would remember the video, their laughter, the way they showed no remorse for the damage they had done. And with each memory, any sense of guilt quickly faded. Over time, I found peace. I rebuilt my life, one step at a time, no longer drowning in the toxicity of their lies. I rediscovered the simple joys of life, going out, meeting new people, and realizing that even after betrayal, life could still be fulfilling. Melissa and Megan, on the other hand, were left to deal with the destruction they had caused. Every day, they had to live with the memory of the life they had ruined. While I moved on, free and unburdened, they were stuck facing the consequences of their actions. In the end, the rumors about Melissa and Megan having syphilis turned out to be true, confirming that their betrayals had been going on long before I had discovered them. It saddened me to think that for so many years, I had been surrounded by such deceitful and immoral women, my wife and my daughter. But now, I live the life I deserve, free, unburdened, and finally at peace with myself.